Small childhood anger destroyed her marriage. The reason shocked everyone. I was born the day my mother died. The midwife said she smiled once, whispered my name, Adana, then closed her eyes forever. My father told me this story every birthday, tears mixing with pride. He said I came into the world fighting, screaming louder than any child he'd ever heard. Maybe I was angry even then. Maybe anger was always part of me, waiting to grow into something I couldn't control. The village women wrapped me in white cloth and buried my mother before sunset. My father held me through that first night, promising he would be enough. He didn't know that promise would cost us both more than he could imagine. My father, Chaik, became everything. He woke before dawn to farm, returned to cook my meals, braided my hair with clumsy fingers that learned gentleness. Other children had mothers who sang lullabies. I had a father who hummed working songs while stirring soup. He never remarried. When people asked why, he'd touch my cheek and say, "She is all I need." I grew up watching him sacrifice sleep, comfort, and companionship. I wanted to make him proud, to prove his choice was worth it. But something dark lived inside me, a quick temper that flared like dry grass catching fire. I inherited his strength but also something harder, something that would later become my curse. By 12, I was helping on the farm after school. My hands knew the soil, understood the rhythm of planting and harvest. My father taught me that the earth gives back what you give it. Care brings abundance. Neglect brings nothing. I believed him. I worked until my muscles ached, proud when he praised my efforts. But farming is patience, and patience was never my gift. One afternoon, exhausted from school and chores, I planted vegetables in the small plot my father had given me. My own space, my own responsibility. I watered those seeds like they were children, imagining the surprise on his face when they grew tall and strong. The crops sprouted within weeks. Small green leaves pushing through dark soil. I checked them every morning before school, every evening after. Then one day, I found destruction. A hen and her chick had scratched through my garden, uprooting seedlings, scattering my work across the ground. Rage filled me so completely I couldn't breathe. All my effort destroyed by stupid birds. I chased them, screaming, throwing rocks. The hen flew away, but the chick stumbled. I caught it easily. The mother hen circled back, frantic, making sounds I'd never heard before. Something in me snapped. I grabbed both birds, ignoring their struggling, and walked to the forest edge where nobody could see. What I did next still haunts me. I dug a hole with my bare hands, dirt pushing under my fingernails. The hen fought. The chick cried. I didn't care. I wanted them to suffer like I suffered. I wanted revenge for my destroyed garden, for all the hard work wasted. I buried them alive, covered them with soil while they thrashed and made desperate sounds. Then silence. I packed the earth down hard, wiping my hands on my dress. Walking home, I felt powerful. Justice had been served. My father asked about my dirty clothes. I said I'd fallen. He believed me. Why wouldn't he? I was his good daughter, his entire world. He never suspected the darkness I just fed. Years passed. I grew into a woman the village noticed. Men stared. Women complimented my skin, my figure, my smile. Suitors came with gifts, yams, fabric, promises. My father entertained them politely but left the choice to me. I refused them all. Something felt incomplete, like I was waiting for a specific person I hadn't met yet. My friends married young, had babies, settled into predictable lives. I kept working the farm, kept searching for something I couldn't name. People whispered that I was too proud, too selective. Let them whisper. I knew my worth. Then one dry season afternoon, a stranger arrived in our village, and everything I thought I knew about myself began to unravel. His name was Abira. He came from the city, visiting distant relatives, looking nothing like the village men I'd rejected. He wore simple clothes but carried himself differently, educated, gentle, present. Our eyes met at the market. He smiled. I looked away, but my heart had already responded. He found reasons to visit the farm, asking my father about crops, techniques, seasons. Chaik liked him immediately. Abira didn't just talk, he listened. He worked alongside us, getting his city hands dirty without complaint. He asked about my mother, my childhood, my dreams. Most men talked only about themselves. Abira made space for my voice. 3 months later, he asked my father for permission to court me. My father looked at me. I nodded, finally ready. Our wedding was everything the village loved: dancing, drumming, food that lasted 3 days. Women ululated. Men drank palm wine. My father cried openly, blessing us with prayers I still remember. May your home overflow with children, he said. May you know only joy. I wore my mother's beads, feeling her presence in every step toward my new life. Abira held my hand like I was precious, like he couldn't believe his fortune. We moved to the city where he worked as an accountant. His family welcomed me warmly. His mother hugged me, called me daughter. Everything felt possible. I believed my struggles were finished, that happiness had finally arrived. I was so wrong. 1 year passed. No pregnancy. We smiled, said it was still early. 2 years. We visited doctors who ran tests, found nothing wrong. 3 years. The smiles became forced. Abira's mother started asking questions during every visit. Have you tried traditional medicine? Special prayers? Different positions? Her concern felt like accusation. His sisters exchanged looks when they thought I couldn't see. At family gatherings, they paraded their children in front of me, counting their blessings loudly. Abira defended me at first, telling them to stop. But even his reassurances began to sound hollow. At night, we tried desperately, mechanically, the joy replaced by desperation. I prayed until my knees hurt. Nothing changed. The insults started small. His mother calling me the one without fruit. His sisters joking about wasted beauty. Neighbors pitying Abira for his empty home. Each word was a small cut that bled privately. I stopped attending family events. Stopped going to church where pregnant women seemed to multiply weekly. Stopped answering questions about children with polite lies. Abira grew distant, not cruel, just absent. He worked longer hours. Came home tired. We ate dinner in silence. The man who once asked about my dreams now asked about nothing. I felt myself disappearing, becoming just a barren wife, a failure, a woman who couldn't fulfill her basic purpose. Depression wrapped around me like heavy cloth. One morning, my phone rang. My father's voice sounded urgent. Adana, you must come home. The ancestors are calling. There's something blocking your blessings. His words sent ice through my veins. I'd avoided traditional solutions, clinging to modern medicine and prayer. But 3 years of emptiness had broken my resistance. I told Abira I was visiting home. He barely looked up from his newspaper. The bus journey back to the village felt eternal. I watched the city fade into farmland, remembering the girl I'd been, strong, hopeful, whole. What had happened to her? When had I become this desperate, diminished thing? The village appeared unchanged, but I had transformed completely. My father looked older, grayer. He hugged me tightly, whispering comfort I couldn't absorb. That evening, he explained. He'd consulted a seer, a woman who lived deep in the forest, someone people visited only in desperate times. She'd spoken without being told anything. Your daughter carries a debt, she'd said. Something buried in anger must be addressed before life can grow inside her. My father asked what she meant. The seer refused to explain further. She knows, was all she said. Bring her to me. Listening to this, my hands went cold. Buried in anger. Memories I'd pushed down for years began surfacing. The hen. The chick. The cruel satisfaction I'd felt. No, it couldn't be that. That was nothing. Just birds. Just childhood foolishness. The next morning, my father led me through paths I'd forgotten existed. The forest grew thick, dark, ancient. We walked until we reached a small clearing where an old woman sat waiting. She didn't greet us, didn't smile. Her eyes locked onto mine immediately. You buried life in anger, she said before I could speak. Life now refuses you. My legs weakened. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, she knew. The earth forgets nothing, she continued. Every action plants seeds. Your anger planted death. Until you make peace with what you destroyed, your womb will remain closed. I tried to deny it, to explain it was just birds, just a moment of childish rage. She raised her hand, silencing me. Intention doesn't matter. Action does. The memory crashed over me with full force. The hen's desperate sounds. The chick's tiny body struggling under soil. My satisfaction at their suffering. I buried it so deep, convinced myself it meant nothing. But the earth had kept record. Every handful of soil I'd thrown, every moment of their terror, recorded, remembered, waiting. I collapsed onto the ground, sobbing. Years of confusion suddenly made horrible sense. My punishment fit my crime perfectly. I buried potential life in anger. Now life refused to grow in me. The seer watched my breakdown without expression. When my tears slowed, she spoke again. There is a path to redemption. But it requires humility you may not possess. She explained the ritual. I had to return to the exact spot where I buried them. I had to dig them up, whatever remained after all these years. I had to dance, sing apologies, acknowledge my cruelty publicly. The entire village had to witness my shame. Only then could I rebury them properly, with respect and remorse. Only then might the earth forgive me. But there's no guarantee, she warned. Redemption doesn't promise reward. You do this to make peace with your actions, not to earn blessings. I understood. This wasn't a transaction. This was atonement. I asked when. She said, tomorrow. At noon. When the sun sees everything clearly. My father walked me home in silence. He didn't ask questions. He simply held my hand like I was 12 again. Word spread quickly. By morning, the entire village knew. The barren wife from the city was performing some ritual. People gathered, curious, judgmental, entertained. I felt their stares as my father and I walked to the forest edge. Someone had already marked the spot. I described it to the seer, and she'd sent people to find it. A small shovel waited. So did dozens of villagers, including children who pointed and whispered. This was my punishment's truest part, not the digging, but the watching. Public humiliation for private cruelty. I knelt beside the marked earth, picked up the shovel, and began. The soil was hard, resistant. My hands blistered quickly. People laughed. Children sang mocking songs. I kept digging. 2 feet down, I found them. Bones. Small, fragile, still somehow identifiable. The hen's larger frame. The chick's tiny skull. I lifted them carefully, tears streaming. They weighed nothing, these remnants of my childhood rage. But they carried such heavy consequences. I stood, holding them, and began to dance. Not gracefully, I was never a dancer. I moved clumsily, awkwardly, like grief given physical form. I sang apologies in our traditional language, words my father had taught me for asking forgiveness. The crowd's laughter faded. Some women began to cry. They understood what this was, a daughter confronting her shadow, a woman unmade by remorse. I danced until exhausted, until my voice cracked, until nothing remained but raw honesty. Finally, I knelt again. I'd brought flowers, incense, things the seer said to include. I arranged them carefully around the new hole I'd dug, deeper this time, more respectful. I placed the bones inside gently, whispering promises. I'm sorry. I was angry and cruel. I didn't understand that actions outlive moments. Forgive me, please. I covered them slowly, patting each handful of soil with reverence I should have shown originally. When finished, I pressed my forehead to the ground, staying there until my father touched my shoulder. The crowd had gone quiet. Walking home, several older women approached. They touched my arm, nodded approval. One whispered, "The earth heard you, child." Now wait. I didn't feel hopeful. I felt empty, purged, but somehow lighter. I returned to the city different. Abira noticed but didn't ask. I didn't explain. How could I? Some truths sound like madness. But something had shifted inside me. The desperate ache for pregnancy remained, but the crushing shame had loosened. I could breathe again. I started cooking meals we used to enjoy. Started asking about his work. Started rebuilding what barrenness had broken between us. He responded cautiously at first, then warmer. We laughed at dinner. Made love with affection instead of desperation. 2 months passed. Then 3. I stopped counting. Then one morning, washing dishes, nausea hit me so hard I collapsed. Abira rushed me to the hospital. The doctor ran tests. Returned smiling. Congratulations, Mrs. Abira. You're pregnant. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Abira grabbed my hand, shouting with joy. The doctor laughed at our reaction, accustomed to happy chaos. But this felt different than normal pregnancy announcements. This felt like resurrection. Like the earth had actually forgiven me. That night, I called my father. He wept. The ancestors heard you, he said. Your mother is smiling. I told Abira everything. The hen, the burial, the ritual, the humiliation. He listened silently. When I finished, he pulled me close. You carried that alone for so long, he whispered. I'm sorry I wasn't there. His acceptance healed something I didn't know was still broken. We fell asleep holding each other, grateful for second chances we didn't deserve but received anyway. The pregnancy progressed normally at first. Morning sickness, fatigue, growing belly. Then at the 4-month ultrasound, the technician's expression changed. She called the doctor. They whispered, staring at the screen. My heart stopped. Something was wrong. The baby. After everything, I was losing the baby. The doctor turned to us, smiling strangely. You're having twins, she said. Twins. 2 babies. Double blessing. We laughed, cried, thanked God. But the surprises weren't finished. At 6 months, another ultrasound revealed 2 more. 4 babies total. 2 sets of twins. The doctors called it extremely rare but stable. Abira's family, who'd written me off, suddenly paid attention. His mother called daily. His sisters visited constantly. I forgave them. Joy left no room for bitterness. I gave birth at 8 months. The delivery room filled with medical staff. 4 babies required 4 teams. They came crying, healthy, perfect. 2 boys. 2 girls. I held them and understood finally. The earth hadn't just forgiven me. It had multiplied my blessing. What I'd buried in anger, I'd received back in abundance through humility. My father visited, holding his grandchildren with shaking hands. Your mother would be so proud, he said. The village threw a celebration bigger than my wedding. People brought gifts, blessings, apologies. Those who'd mocked my ritual now called me blessed. I accepted their changed attitudes without judgment. Everyone grows. Everyone learns. I'd learned the hardest way possible. Abira's mother came to me privately one afternoon. She knelt, which shocked me. Elders don't kneel for younger women. Forgive me, she said. I added to your pain instead of supporting you. I forgot that blessings come in God's timing, not ours. I helped her stand, hugged her tightly. We all forget sometimes, I said. What matters is remembering. She became my greatest helper with the babies, often staying weeks to assist. His sisters apologized too, bringing gifts and genuine warmth. Our home transformed from silent emptiness to chaotic fullness. 4 babies meant constant noise, endless diapers, sleepless nights. I'd never been happier. Every exhausting moment reminded me that redemption was real, that the earth truly forgave those who approached it with honest hearts. Word of my story spread beyond our village. Women dealing with infertility came asking questions. I told them everything honestly: the anger, the burial, the consequences, the ritual, the forgiveness. Some believed. Others thought I was crazy. That was fine. Truth doesn't require universal acceptance. What mattered was that parents started teaching children differently. I heard mothers telling sons and daughters, "See what Adana's anger cost her? Treat all living things with respect. You never know what seeds you're planting." The seer visited once, meeting my children. She touched each baby's forehead, blessing them. "You understand now," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I understood that actions echo through time, that anger destroys more than we see, that humility heals what pride breaks. My children are 5 now. I tell them stories every night, not fairy tales, but truth. I tell them about their grandmother who died giving life. About their grandfather who became 2 parents. About the hen and chick their mother destroyed in anger. About the ritual that saved me. They listen with wide eyes, asking questions I answer honestly. "Did the birds forgive you, Mama?" my daughter asked once. I said, "I hope so, but forgiveness isn't the point. Making peace with our actions is." They're learning early what took me years: that every choice plants seeds, that anger multiplies pain, that humility opens doors pride locks forever. Sometimes I visit that burial spot, bringing flowers. The earth there grows especially green now. Life persists. Life forgives. Life returns what we offer it, whether anger or respect. I chose anger once. I'll spend the rest of my life choosing differently. That's my debt. That's my joy. That's my testimony to anyone listening.